The little girl's voice cut, through the rumble of motorcycle engines like a knife, through silence. "Please," she sobbed, tugging at the leather jacket of the nearest biker. "Please arrest me, lock me up. I don't want to go back there." 27, chrome-plated. Harley sat idling in the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, somewhere along Route 66 in rural Oklahoma. The men and women who rode, them members of the Guardian Angels motorcycle club, had stopped for their usual Saturday breakfast, their leather vests adorned with patches in their weathered faces telling stories of miles traveled and lives lived hard. They were grandparents, veterans, teachers, and mechanics who'd found brotherhood on two wheels. But none of them had expected their morning coffee to be interrupted by a barefoot 7-year-old with matted blonde hair and bruises painting her thin arms like a terrible watercolor. Big Mike was the first to kneel down. At 6'4" and 270 pounds, with a beard that reached his chest and arms covered in faded tattoos, he looked like he could break a man in half, but his voice came out gentle, almost breaking. "Sweetheart, bikers can't arrest people. We're not police officers." The girl's face crumpled. Fresh tears carved paths through the dirt on her cheeks. "But you look scary. You look like you could stop bad people." Sarah, the club's secretary and a grandmother of 5, pushed through the circle of leather and denim that had formed around the child. She stripped off her jacket and wrapped it around the girl's shaking shoulders. "Honey, where are your parents?" The little girl flinched at the word. "I ran away. From the house with the broken porch. The one on Miller Road, but I can't go back. He said next time he'd make sure. I couldn't run anywhere ever again." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought if I was in jail, I'd be safe." "Don't they feed you in jail? And you have a bed? And nobody can hurt you there?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the engines seemed to quiet. Sarah's eyes met Big Mike's, and 25 other bikers saw the same fury and heartbreak reflected in each other's faces. These were people who'd chosen to spend their weekends escorting abused children to court, forming human walls at the funerals of kids who'd lost their battles with cancer, standing guard at domestic violence shelters. They'd seen the worst of what humanity could do to its most vulnerable. But something about this moment, this tiny girl choosing prison over home, struck a chord that resonated in their collective soul. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly. Emma Grace Miller." Big Mike was already on his phone, stepping away to call the police and child services. But Red Dog, a Vietnam veteran with a prosthetic leg and eyes that had seen too much, crouched down next to Emma. "You're right that we can't arrest you, little one. But you know what we can do? We can make sure you never have to be afraid again." Emma's eyes, gray as storm clouds, searched his face for the lie she'd learned to expect from adults. "Promise?" "Promise." The next hour moved like a carefully choreographed dance. Officer Maria Santos arrived first, taking Emma's statement with practiced gentleness while Sarah held the girl's hand. 2 social workers from Child Protective Services followed, their faces hardening as they photographed Emma's injuries and documented her story. She lived with her mother's boyfriend. Her mother had disappeared 6 months ago, and nobody knew where she'd gone. The boyfriend, Dale Hutchins, had a record as long as a country highway: assault, drug possession, child endangerment from a previous relationship. But here's where the story takes its turn, where ordinary people decided that the minimum required by law wasn't nearly enough. "She'll go into emergency foster care tonight," the social worker, Janet, explained to the bikers who'd refused to leave Emma's side. "It's the best we can do on a Saturday. We'll try to find a longer-term placement, but the system is overwhelmed. It might take weeks." Big Mike's jaw clenched. "How many times have you heard that about a kid who ends up falling through the cracks?" Janet sighed, and 20 years of fighting an impossible system showed in her face. "Too many times." That's when Sarah pulled out her phone. "Give me 10 minutes." She made calls while Emma sat wrapped in a blanket, eating her first real meal in days: pancakes with strawberries, scrambled eggs, and orange juice. One call became 5, which became 15. The Guardian Angels Motorcycle Club had chapters across 3 states, and each chapter had members with resources, connections, and most importantly, hearts that couldn't ignore a child in need. By the time Emma finished her 3rd glass of juice, Sarah had made 23 calls and worked what could only be described as a miracle. "Janet," Sarah said, pulling the social worker aside. I'm a licensed foster parent. Been one for 15 years. My home study's current, I've got the space, and I've got an entire motorcycle club that will make sure this child has everything she needs and then some. What do I need to do to take her home today? Janet's professional composure cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. I'll make the calls. I'll push it through. But the bikers didn't stop there. Red Dog knew a trauma therapist who specialized in childhood abuse, his own daughter, and she agreed to see Emma pro bono. Tiny, a biker who stood 5'0" but worked as a pediatrician, volunteered to be Emma's primary doctor. Hammer, who ran a construction company, offered to renovate Sarah's spare bedroom into something special. And one by one, every member of the club committed to being part of Emma's village, the people who'd make sure she had birthday parties, Christmas presents, school supplies, college funds, and most importantly, proof that the world held more good than evil. 3 hours after Emma had grabbed Big Mike's jacket in desperation, she was buckled into Sarah's pickup truck, heading to what the bikers had already started, calling Emma's home, 26. Motorcycles formed an escort, their engines rumbling a promise of protection that shook the Oklahoma sky. In the weeks that followed, Emma learned what family truly meant. She learned that scary-looking bikers threw the best birthday parties, complete with a donated bounce house and enough cake to feed a small army. She learned that Big Mike cried like a baby when she drew him a picture that said, "My hero," in crayon. She learned that Sunday mornings meant pancakes with Sarah, and Saturday afternoons meant motorcycle rides with her 27 guardians. She also learned that Dale Hutchins had been arrested, that Officer Santos had made sure the charges stuck, and that she'd never have to see him again. 6 months later, on a sunny afternoon in April, Sarah officially adopted Emma. The courthouse was packed with leather vests. The judge had to tell the bikers to hold their applause 3 separate times, and when it was official, Emma Grace Miller became Emma Grace Anderson. She stood in front of the Guardian Angels Motorcycle Club and said, "I used to think bikers were scary people who arrested bad guys. I was wrong. They're family who save people instead." There wasn't a dry eye in the courthouse. The story could end there, wrapped up neat with tears and triumph. But the truth is, it never really ended. Emma grew up surrounded by that wall of leather and chrome. She graduated high school with 27 bikers cheering louder than anyone else. She went to college on a scholarship the club established in her name, and eventually she became a social worker herself, dedicating her life to pulling other children out of darkness, riding to cases on her own. Motorcycle, a gift from Big Mike, on her 21st birthday. Because that's what happens when kindness meets action, when a community decides that one child's cry for help will be answered with everything they have. Emma had begged bikers to arrest her, thinking prison was the only safe place in a cruel world. Instead, they showed her that safety comes from people who choose to care, from strangers who become family, from the profound human capacity to see suffering and refuse to look away. And on quiet Saturday mornings, if you drive through rural Oklahoma, you might see them still, the Guardian Angels, riding Route 66, their engines rumbling like thunder. They're not looking for trouble. They're looking for the next Emma, the next child who needs someone to prove that the world isn't all darkness. Because sometimes the scariest-looking people turn out to be the ones with the biggest hearts. Sometimes salvation doesn't come wearing a badge. Sometimes it arrives on 2 wheels, wrapped in leather, ready to change everything.